Well, it is the top of the hour, so let's begin. We're really, really grateful for those of you who have joined us today. And our topic for today is, as all of you hopefully know, is getting the most out of our SMEs. I wanted to call this something else, but let me turn my video on there a second. I wanted to call this SMEs. Sometimes you love them, sometimes you hate them, sometimes they just drive you crazy, but apparently the title was too long. So we went with getting the most out of your SMEs, and yeah, we really look forward to this conversation. Just a little bit about Ingenuity, just some of the services that we provide. Um, we really do three things, and those three things are we do custom learning design, which is from consulting to curriculum mapping to gap analysis to needs analysis, learner analysis, to the design and all the way through instructional design process and all the way through to the development process. And we have all sorts of capabilities in video and animation, in AI animation. We do a lot of interesting and fun things, graphic design, obviously. The second is translation and localization. I think we're the only company in the world that does both custom learning design and translation localization. We have translated in the last 10 years or so more than 1 billion words. We've translated and localized more than 10,000 different learning modules. And so we've been doing that a long time. And then finally, staff augmentation, which is it's really focused not on any job, but it's focused specifically in learning. So we have instructional designers and graphic designers and project managers and various artists that are all connected to learning. We've placed several thousand people for short-term assignments in companies around the world. So if any of those things are of interest to you, we'd be happy to talk to you, obviously. But I want to get right to the matter at hand. And as we do that, we'll just give some introductions. My name is Jerry Zastra, and I'm the Senior Director of Learning at Ingenuity. And since Claire, you're next to me, would you give just a bit of an introduction of who you are and what you do?
Yes, I'm happy to be here. My name is Claire Stuve. My background is in instructional design and teacher education. I started as a K-12 teacher many years ago, but I currently lead the development of global online learning programs for the American Diabetes Association, where I've been lucky enough to work with fantastic teams, including many different subject matter experts that we'll talk about today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Claire. And Miriam, it looks like you're next.
So I'm Miriam Taylor. I'm the client success manager at Ingenuity. Similar background as Claire. I spent some time as a high school teacher, and then about the past 25 years in the learning and development industry, working as an instructional designer and leading teams. So my role at Ingenuity is to work kind of between our clients, helping craft the right solution, and then with our learning team, just to make sure that everything's working smoothly and our clients get exciting, interesting, and effective projects.
Wonderful. And finally, certainly not least, Lana Jobson, if you would, please.
Hi, I'm Lana, and I'm an instructional designer project lead at Ingenuity, and I too have been in the industry for a fair bit amount of time. I really enjoy coming up with creative solutions for our clients and following them through to development to make sure that the solutions fit their needs, and also enjoy doing consulting and webinars like this.
Wonderful. Thank you. So our team had a little bit of fun as we were putting this together. We sent a chat out to our team and asked them, what are some of the things that you like and what are some of the things that drive you crazy about SMEs? Truthfully, most of the comments were, were on things that were driving them crazy about SMEs, because obviously as a service provider, we rely on the SMEs of other companies. And so that's a challenge for us sometimes. So what we did is we sort of grouped them. We grouped these comments into three different types of SMEs. and we gave them names, and we gave them short descriptions. And honestly, it was fun to do, and it was the comments were pretty funny. But the very first SME that we're going to look at is who we're calling Eric the Expert. And yeah, you can sort of tell from his face what kind of person he is. Miriam, do you want to just talk to us a little bit about who Eric the Expert SME is? And we've built caricatures here. We know
Yeah,
that.
of
Not
course.
all SMEs are like this.
No.
However, there are some Eric the Experts out there. Who is Eric the Expert, Miriam?
So Eric the Expert is somebody that we really do need because he has very deep technical knowledge. He's probably been at the company or the organization for a really long time. And so he has all of that sort of what we call head knowledge, right? All the factual content, but also a lot of just like being on the job, right? Like what works, what doesn't work. What's challenging with an Eric expert type situation is that, and understandably so, this kind of SME struggles a little bit to make it relatable. So if I'm trying to get information, say for an onboarding module, it's difficult for them to put themselves in the position of like a new hire and think how to explain things easily and straightforward. It's also difficult for them to think about like what's the baseline level of knowledge? Not everyone needs to know things as deeply as Eric the Expert does. And then one other thing we found is that just depending on their experience as a SME, they may feel threatened as an instructional designer because at times they just don't understand the role, or they may feel an instructional designer is kind of trying to usurp their expertise, which is not the case. But we often find we spend time explaining kind of roles and what we need from them. So Eric is very much needed, but there are interesting challenges working with someone like that, and we'll talk about that as we keep going.
Yeah. How about Claire or Miriam? Sorry, Claire or Lana, anything you want to comment on Eric?
I would just say this is probably out of the three experts or the SMEs that we're going to meet today, this is probably the one I run into the most often.
Hmm.
And I don't want to give away any of my tips just yet because I know that's later in the presentation.
But this is common. How about the rest of you? And I should tell you too, this is meant to be interactive. I know many of you join webinars lately, and often you're told, save all your comments and questions for the end. We would much prefer, you could put them in chat, you can put them in the Q&A box, but ask whatever you want while you are thinking of it. I think it just makes for a far more interesting experience. So I would love to know. You're welcome, man. So yeah, please join in. Those of you who are on Eric the Expert, sound familiar? While you're thinking about that, we'll talk about yeah, Angela, very familiar, huh? We'll talk about Maya. Maya is missing in action, and so this is a person again that is desperately needed, but wow, it's tough to get them engaged. Lana, any introduction to Maya that you want to give us?
Sure, she is this type of person is just overbooked. She's just spread much too thin, and you'll notice her right away because if she agrees to get you some content and then that deadline goes by and you haven't heard from her, or she's missing meetings. The other thing about Maya is that it's hard to either develop or deepen a working relationship with her because she is spread so thin. She just doesn't have anything left to give, even to form a good working relationship with you. So it makes it very tough to, one, get work done, but even to get on the same page with the project with her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of comments, Lana, on I experience Maya all the time. Maya wants to be helpful and is trying. Yeah. Okay, I'm having a hard time staying up with the comments here. Yeah, just overstretched. I think somebody said here, I experience Maya all the time. Rashonda says, I actually know Maya, which is kind of funny. Rashonda, I'm hoping that you aren't Maya. Um, and so Jasmine asking, how do you check in with Maya about deliverables without feeling like you're micromanaging us? Me. We're going to get to that when we get to some of our uh, tips and suggestions and best practices. So we'll come to that. And that's funny. I have to often take the standpoint of you talk and I'll type. Also a great suggestion and something we do. Um, Claire, anything else, or Miriam, anything else to add on Maya?
I see Angela wrote in the chat about being voluntold, and I actually think that's the issue for all of
Yeah.
SMEs
Yeah,
is that quite often they're voluntold to do something, and then we run into these issues.
yeah. And they don't like that. No one likes that. But on the flip side, they're essential, right? I mean, you have
Mhm.
to capture what's in their experience and in their heads. Um, all right. Well, let's move on to the last one. Carlo is the next one, and maybe less frequent, but Carlo the Confused. And Claire, since your face is up on the screen, I'll just start with you. Who is Carlo the Confused?
So usually Carlo doesn't understand the process for a variety of reasons. Maybe he didn't realize that he was the SME. He doesn't know what a SME is. It's probably his first time working on a project like this, whether he's new to online learning or maybe just it's a different format. So quite often Carlo doesn't have as much background in online education as maybe Eric and Maya do. And so what happens is that can lead to some lack of confidence, and part of that is then asking others for approval rather than Carlo being the one making the decisions.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Miriam or Lana?
I would add that he may not have any idea what a storyboard is or how to read it.
Mm,
So you spend a fair amount of time just introducing him to the format and the process of this is a storyboard, this is what you're supposed to do. We're looking for feedback, not just, oh, everything looks great, and then you develop it, and then all of a sudden there's all of these comments that should have been caught earlier on.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I think too, in a lot of ways, Carlo, and we'll like you said, Jerry, we'll talk about tips later, but if you can help Carlo understand the process, then really it's a large compliment to him, right? That he's been chosen to do this. And then, these people become really wonderful to work with.
Hmm.
So we'll talk more about that later. But of all of them, he's one that, if you can overcome the confusion, then it becomes fun.
There's one wonderful well, there's several wonderful comments, but one's really sticking out to me in the chat. A big challenge of mine is a stakeholder who's acting as a SME, but has
That's
not been in
tricky.
the role in a long time or never was.
Mhm.
The good news is we have a webinar coming up in January on keeping your stakeholders informed and engaged. But the stakeholder sometimes not only is not a SME in the topic that you're talking about, but is not a SME in learning at all. And they think everything can be produced in 3 days, and they don't really. Yeah, that's messy. So we'll talk about that a little bit coming up. So 3 keys. We're going to start with some overall ways of managing a relationship and managing so that if it goes from a negative relationship to a neutral or a neutral to a positive, we think that there are 3 keys to really making that relationship work. And the very first one is understanding roles, which I think gets at the stakeholder and SME differential. So Miriam, just walk us through a little bit about why it's important that we understand roles.
Yeah, well, I think, we've already highlighted the importance of that, but, depending on the size of your organization and, or just depending on understanding the learning culture in your organization, how much, learning has been developed internally. I even just talked to someone recently where it's a pretty large organization, but they'd never had anyone specifically as like a director of learning before. So you have a lot of work to do if you're in a role like that, of just educating everyone in general. Here's the purpose of my team, here's how we can help you. And I think understanding the roles, probably the best way to do that and to be successful with that. My approach was always, I'm here to help you. We want you to be freed up to bring your best to the table, which is your subject matter expertise. Let me worry about timelines and deadline. Okay, again, they have to meet those, but I mean, let me build a schedule for you. Let me figure out, I can collect the information the best way that you can give it to me. All those kinds of things. And by putting myself in a position of like, I'm here to help you. This is what a SME is. This is what, like to Lana's point, what a storyboard. In fact, one of the best ways really, and Lana, you could probably elaborate on this, is you find yourself repeating things so much that finally we sat down, we're like, all right, what have we said 1,000 times? If we took half a day and drafted a couple emails, made a short PowerPoint or like an infographic, we could send this to them ahead of time. And then when we meet for the first time, now we've just got a shorter conversation. And so that whole understanding roles, if you find yourself repeating things too many times, maybe it's time just to take a step back and develop some learning materials about those roles, which can make your life a lot simpler moving forward.
Yeah, and one thing I want to highlight that you said and was in the chat as well is finding their methodology of communicating. You said kind of helping. Do we need to sit down? I mean, Miriam, you and I and Lana, we can all think of situations where we've said, okay, we need this person to need to give them questions and they type it out. Other people need to have a conversation. Other people need to just talk and record it. I want to come back to Becky here for a second. Becky's suggesting another category, the overwhelmed. Are we Oliver the overwhelmed? I don't know, Olivia the overwhelmed. Anyway, a good SME who's just staffed to every single project because they're good at what they do, and you do end up competing. And those are realistic things. Becky, I don't understand your comment, so I bake. Is that your way of relieving stress, or is that you just waiting? But anyway, yeah. Claire, how about you? What do you do to help a SME understand not just their role, but kind of all the roles in here? And great comment here. How do you build trust? How do you do that?
I'm going to oversimplify it by saying one word: communication.
Mm,
Sometimes I feel like I'm over communicating to all of my stakeholders, but then they say, "Oh no, I'd much rather have you fill my inbox than not
mm,
communicate at all," just to make sure everyone's on the same page. But it really comes down to the relationship building piece. And when I meet with my stakeholders, I'll talk about things not related to work. And sometimes people say,
mm,
got to get back to the agenda because I'm the queen of getting off topic. But really, that helps me develop a good relationship with them. I understand how they work, what's going on in their
hmm.
lives. So Terry mentioned in the chat, we have to remember that these people have day jobs, and by
Yep.
building that relationship. Now I work with healthcare providers. I'm learning, oh, they were on call, or they just got off a 24-hour shift, or they were in the emergency room saving
Right.
lives. And now here I'm asking them, can you add citations to your PowerPoint? So I think the deeper your relationship and the more you get to learn about your stakeholders, the smoother the process is going to be.
Yeah. Good point. Joanne makes an interesting point too. She's had SMEs at the VP level a couple of times, and it's really, really hard to get them to respond. And oftentimes, Joanna, maybe you've experienced this too, where uh, the VPs want to come in at the end, right? And then they want to make the back, the front, and the top, the bottom, and redo everything. It is a challenge because these are people with, sometimes 60 to 80 hour a week jobs, and finding a moment or even getting their attention to do that. Part of that, I think, is Claire, you're addressing with find a way to connect with them. Don't be just the person who's one more, person in their ear chirping for their time. Maybe find a way to help them in some way. Yeah.
I've also
Lon,
found it.
oh,
I've also found that if I know them and we're, virtual friends, then they answer my email over people they don't know. So I get more responses too because we have that relationship.
Yep, for sure. I think Stephanie's being a little tongue in cheek here. Bribery is a tool. I used to work with somebody who knew that I loved oatmeal raisin cookies, and it worked. And she needed my attention sometimes. And I would like to say that I'm a stronger person than that. I'm not. I'm absolutely not. And it really it worked. And so yeah. Lana, anything on understanding roles that you want to add?
I think it helps relieve their stress some, because many times, especially if they're Carlo the Confused and they're new at this, they're thinking, oh, they have to come up with, the delivery strategy and all the things that the instructional designer really should do as part of their role. So just helping them know what their zone is, and I think it relieves stress and um, especially if you've mapped out carefully the meeting times and the check-in times, so they know right up front what's expected. I think that also helps to relieve their stress.
Yep. And then before we move on, one great comment here. If I work with a vice VP or a senior person, I reach out to their admin. That relationship with a VP's admin is that might be the person who gets the cookie, right?
Mm.
Because that's the person that is going to make time, find time, and so on. And if not, then ask them to request the senior leader, find somebody else because we need to move on here, and we have a project to complete. Let's look at the gatekeeper. There you go. Let's look at the second one, understanding the value that they bring to the project. Miriam, let's start with you. How do you help them come to this understanding?
Yeah, I think that, for example, within Eric, the expert, he probably understands his value, but helping him sort of helping them develop sort of that empathy for who's the audience, well, we're developing this for new hires. Can you put yourself back in the shoes? Can you think about when you were a new hire?
Hmm.
Um, and just helping them, really helping them understand who the audience is. But also, like Lana already talked about, reducing the learning curve for them, right? By explaining roles, helping them understand what we expect them to bring, that reduces their stress. And I think helping them understand, like, what is the risk? Sometimes the best way to teach somebody about value is to do it in the negative, right? Like, if we didn't have you on this, can you imagine what this project would look like?
Mm,
So I
excellent
think
point.
sometimes we skip this part because we just think, well, duh, you've been tapped, you know the value you're bringing. No, it doesn't
Right.
hurt. And I'm not saying artificial flattery, but it doesn't hurt to help them understand the
Yeah.
value they're bringing.
Well, and especially with somebody who's overwhelmed,
Mhm.
Maya MIA. Maya's not MIA because she doesn't care.
Right.
Maya's got all sorts of value propositions coming at her all day. And she has to judge. I have to give, what's more urgent and all the rest of that. Helping them see how this can actually benefit, dozens of people, hundreds of people, potentially thousands of people, how it can connect to what they're trying to accomplish. So you're, VP of operations or COO, and you're trying to get in front of her and she's ignoring you, and you finally are able to communicate, this will actually solve your problem. This will contribute and make your day better. Is a good way to do that. And I think that gets at the value proposition. Um, Claire, how about you?
Well, I think a powerful way of getting those points across is to use metrics and examples. So again, I work with healthcare providers who are very busy, and sometimes they don't know if it's worth their time. They're so short on time. Is it worth the small bit of extra time that they have to create something? So I show them examples. Quite often examples had SMEs who they know who that person is, and then I share the metrics. Dr. So and so developed this module. We had 8,000 people take it.
Mm,
98% of people said it changed their clinical practice and their behavior. So when these SMEs can see the impact that other SMEs have had, then it fuels their passion for making a difference in the world. And quite often it can mitigate issues for all three of the, Carlo, Maya, and Eric.
Yeah, those are excellent, excellent points. Really, really good.
And
Lana,
if
oh, sorry, go ahead, Claire.
Well, I was just gonna say, if you don't have examples, there are so many examples out there that you can, Google from other organizations. So my motto is beg, borrow, or steal, don't recreate the wheel. So if you don't
Yeah,
already have something, just, go borrow it from someone else and then use those metrics with your SMEs.
yeah, yeah. Excellent. Lana, anything to add?
No, I think Claire summed it up nicely. We just want them to see the importance of using all the experience and what they've learned over the years and passing it on to others so that their learning curve is much shorter and they can get up to speed faster. So I think what Claire said with metrics is fantastic.
All right, so Lana, I'm going to start with you on the third one that we have, which is understanding the characteristics of a successful SME. Talk to us a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, we kind of alluded to this at the opening, but a good SME is someone who has the expertise, but also the institutional knowledge, so they know how to apply their subject matter within the organization that you're writing curriculum for. And they have not lost touch with the persona that you're trying to develop the material for. So even if they are very experienced and haven't been a newbie in a long time, they would have some ability to relate to that person. And part of that is up to the instructional designer to create a good persona that say, oh yeah, I remember those days, put them back in that mind frame.
Mm-hmm.
Really, the two things that you don't want are the content dump, where everything's important when it's really not,
Mm-hmm.
or where they're so used to doing whatever it is that you're training on that they're skipping steps. Things that are intuitive to them are not intuitive to someone else. So yeah, it's kind of a tricky person to find. And maybe we'll talk about this later, but sometimes it needs to be two people instead of just one.
Right. And this is getting me thinking. Chances are SMEs are repetitive. Chances are you're not a one-off SME, right? How many of you, and you can put this in the chat, go back to the SMEs and show them the completed learning experience? How many of you share that at the end, or is there no feedback loop for them? Or to Claire's point, how many of you show them the metrics and say, "Hey, remember when you did this 6 months ago?" Yeah, Bruce, you're always in learning metrics. Okay, this is encouraging. Yeah, Kareem, not there yet, but not just part one. Show them what it turned out to be. And I just saw the word feedback pop up. Maybe meet Michelle. It's a great point. Maybe meet to get some feedback, but then show them the metric 6 months later. Remember that thing we did now 14 months ago. Here's how it changed. And I think that gets to that sort of relationship, helping them see where they're at and how it made a difference, so that the next time they're pretty excited about that. Claire, how about you? How do you help? How do you understand the characteristics of a successful SME?
Well, success breeds success. So I think exactly what you were saying, show them that they did a good job and they'll keep growing. But something that I run into quite often actually is SMEs with imposter syndrome. And so they are credible and they have the expertise, but they feel like a fraud. But I work with a lot of early career
What do you
SMEs.
mean by that? What do you mean they feel like a fraud?
Um, they look at all these other, quote unquote famous SMEs and think, oh, I'm not as
Oh,
good as that person. And
interesting.
so because they're earlier in their career, or maybe they're not, I think everybody suffers from imposter syndrome, but I happen to work with a lot of early career professionals. And
Mm,
I just have to point out, you are credible and you do have expertise in, whatever field it is. I think everyone's an expert at something. So sometimes I just have to coach them a little bit and point it out and, look at all these journal articles that you have and all the work you've done. And then they can connect that, that they have the credibility.
yeah. Yeah, Anna's coaching you to fake it till you make it for the imposter syndrome, but also saying that's a real thing. That's a real thing. I hadn't thought about that, or how, maybe that's our last example of like, how am I a SME here? Do I really know? What if I get this wrong? And so there's some anxiety. I hadn't really considered that, but that's really a good point. Miriam, anything you want to add on this?
No, I think they both gave some great suggestions. So yeah, I think we're good to move on.
Okay. Novi, I like your comment. I just started, oops, it just went away there. I just started doing a quarterly check-in with SMEs on the training developed to see what training success uh, or what can be improved. That's fantastic. And then Kathy too, sometimes asking questions of the SME that they'll be able to expand on can help them feel like, yeah, get over that credibility gap. Um, Terry, you're not encouraging anybody. 33 years and still imposter syndrome is an instructional this. That's funny and true, right? I suppose we all feel that. Um, okay, well let's move on to some best practices, and we'll just start with the beginning. Um, how do you onboard a SME? So this is not somebody you've worked with before, and chances are they haven't been a SME before. And now I've got imposter syndrome in my head. So, how do you overcome some of those things? And Miriam, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, we have quite a few things on the screen, but I think that um, again, one of the things that Lana and I did a while ago was kind of creating that package of this is what it means to be a SME. This is what my role is. This is what your role is, and getting that to them ahead of time. But then also, once you meet, a huge part of it is, like Lana said, helping them understand who the audience is, who that learner is that we're looking for. It's important that they understand that based on, we need to develop like what levels of content, who are we developing for? But it also, I think, really triggers that sort of empathetic feeling of, oh, okay, I understand, like I can picture in my head who I'm developing this for.
Hmm.
Um, and I think I'll let both Lana and Claire provide other good answers, but I do think down at the bottom, so creating learning objectives to manage information flow. So I'm just going to tell a story on Jerry. Jerry and I have worked together on projects in the past, and at one point he was a SME, and Jerry does not like to write learning objectives.
I'm sorry. This was your failure in asking
Yeah,
me to
I
be a
know, right?
SME. I wasn't, I was just an imposter. So
Yeah.
and you decided that. So.
No, I'm kidding. But it is difficult, right? For someone because typically they think in terms of like, well, the learner just needs to know these four things.
Hmm.
And so one of the one way to onboard a SME is to help them understand what a learning objective is and how it contains the scope of the project. Even if they don't have to write it all. Have them get started. You can finish it. But I think particularly with someone like an Eric, the expert, who's just going to give you everything. If you begin by helping them define, here are the four things, the most
Mm.
critical learning objectives, now I can avoid sort of that information dump and all the extra because I can keep directing him back to, now, these are the four learning objectives. If that doesn't fit, I know it's wonderfully important for you, but it's not at this level.
Yeah.
So that's a key thing, I think.
And honestly, in my defense, it was a long time ago, right? I was teaching in an MBA program, and
Yes.
Miriam was building curriculum or helping me build
It was a
curriculum.
long time ago. You're
Long time
wonderful
ago,
at it
and
now.
yeah, and thank you for doing that. But honestly, my reaction to you, Miriam, at the time was like, well, I just need him to know all the stuff that's in here, right? That's not a learning objective, and you were incredibly helpful to get me to see there's probably a lot of stuff in here. Fine. What are the things we need to get out and why and what do we want them to be able to know and do? yeah, or believe at the end of it. And that framework was incredibly helpful. I want to come back to a comment that Janet made. One of the ways of maybe onboarding a new SME, or even the Eric the expert, asking them for a time where they solved the chaos that erupted when their processes were not followed. I really like that, because I think if you can help people bring order out of chaos, and chances are they can probably diagnose the reason for the chaos, you can tie it back, and I think that's what you're getting at. You could tie it back to making their life better. And that's a great, Adam Smith self-interest stuff, right? I'm interested in making my life better and better for the people around me. If you can connect to that, that's a powerful thing. Claire, how about you? How you're working, you're working with SMEs all over the place, given what you do at American Diabetes. Um, how do you onboard a new SME?
Well, unlike you, Jerry, I love learning objectives.
Well,
And
I
and
love them
uh,
now.
well, I also like measurable learning objectives, which is
Mm,
often what we don't get now in healthcare. To offer continuing education, we have to have a pre-test and a post-test.
yeah.
Those questions have to align to learning objectives. Plus, we have funders, and we have to report back what percentage of learners met each learning objective. And when I first started at the American Diabetes Association, we had the SMEs write the learning objectives, which was not always very helpful. And so I
Hmm.
have found it's a lot easier if we at least craft, and I tell them these are a rough draft. Even when I'm creating a module that I'm teaching, I change my learning objectives so many times throughout the process. But we have rough draft learning objectives, but we have a template PowerPoint that we use where
Hmm.
we have each learning objective on a slide. And then in between those, they put their slides with the content that directly aligns with the learning objective. Now, throughout the instructional design process, we don't always put everything in that same order, but it
Hmm.
helps our SMEs visually see
Yeah.
what content goes with what learning objective. And to kind of answer the question in the chat about how many learning objectives,
Yeah.
I like to have 2 or 3. Now, our modules are anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes long, but when you start getting 4 or 5 learning objectives, that's to me, it's just we're contributing to cognitive overload of our learners, and it's
Hmm.
too much. So when we have our SMEs write learning objectives, and I said, Eric is the SME that I run into the most, I'll get 6 learning objectives, and
Right.
that's a lot for half an hour. So it's
Right.
helpful to write the learning objectives at least as a guide, and then have that template where the SMEs can see how things are aligned.
Yeah, we'll come back to the onboarding, but I want to stay on that topic for a minute. Miriam and Lana, any guidelines or suggestions for the number of learning objectives? Honestly, one seems light to me. It depends on the content, but don't run anybody over with the high-low. Maybe that's, a pretty simple one. But any suggestion, Miriam or Lana, on how to think through the number of learning objectives?
Go ahead, Lana. You are the learning objective queen.
Well, I don't know about that, but I do know it. I guess it depends on, I'm going to not give you an answer at first. It depends on the style of learning objectives that you write.
Hmm.
We really like to break it down into skills or behaviors that you're trying to change, knowledge that you're trying to give, and then even values or attitudes that you're trying to move or shift. So if you even just have one of each of those, so if you're breaking your learning objectives into smaller pieces like that, then I think you can have a few more. One would be, to me, very small.
Okay. Miriam?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yep, that's a perfect description. It's not based on the length of time of the content, although it can be to a certain degree, but you're just looking at what do you need your learners to know, believe, or do.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. Let's come back to Miriam. Let's come back to onboarding SMEs. Share some thoughts on that, if you would, and Lana, jump in too. because we sort of took a little bit of a sidetrack on objectives. But
Oh,
Lana, let's go with you. How do you onboard a SME?
I also like to bring into perspective not just the learning objectives. I feel like that's like the one side of the picture. The other side of the picture where your learning needs to fit in the middle and answer to both are your company or organization's goals or objectives. So if your organization has a very specific growth goal for 2024 and your learning content could support that, I really like to make that tie very clear. One, it just helps make your organization all aligned and everybody on the same page, but it also points to the worth of your learning team and what you're doing.
Mm,
And sometimes we do need to be vocal about that we are bringing great value to our organization. And these are the metrics, as Claire said, to show it. So helping the SME also understand that we sit in between the needs of the learner and the needs of the organization, I think is really
mhm.
important.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Great. Um, let's move on to the second one, which is we've talked a little bit about it's managing that relationship. This is a little bit more focused on both extracting information and then managing the time and the deadlines. And for those of you listening in, if you want to throw in chat some of the ways that you have found it effective to extract information. Extract is a strange word. I think we we struggled with it, but that's what we mean is it's knowledge transfer. How do I get what's in your head um, accessible? And so Claire, you want to talk about that a little bit? How do you do that? And again, knowing that you're working with really, really intelligent, healthcare people, sometimes even understanding what they're talking about. How do you get information out of them, Claire?
This really depends on who your SME is. So I didn't mention, but before the American Diabetes Association, I worked for 10 years at a university. And when I worked there with SMEs, they loved writing scripts and books and journal articles. So when I would say to a SME, just pretend you're writing a textbook. Open up Word, just start typing everything that you would put in a book. If you have videos, images, just put it all in there. And they would send me 20, 30-page Word documents.
The academics would.
They would, yes.
Yeah,
Which was
of
great
course.
because then if we
Mhm.
made videos out of any of it, we already had the script so we could caption it to be accessible. Now, with the healthcare professionals with whom I work now, I don't know that a single one has ever written a script like that because they're very short on time. And so we give them they usually make a presentation in PowerPoint and then we give them a Zoom link and they go in Zoom. They record it just like they were presenting a webinar.
Interesting.
And then that way we have the transcript for the instructional designer who's not a subject matter expert. It also makes it easy to caption. And sometimes we'll use a 30 or 60-second clip from that Zoom, or we'll strip out the audio. But then we also use a website, rev.com. It's very inexpensive, like a couple dollars to have a video caption.
Hmm.
So that way, things can be fully accessible. We have the script, we have the video, we have the explanation for the instructional designer, but we do also set up meetings between the SME and the instructional designer so that they can meet and talk through the content since the instructional designer is not a subject matter expert. But I think most of the people with whom I've worked who are subject matter experts love to talk about it because they
Mm.
spend their whole life on this topic or they have a PhD in it and have worked many years. So to ask them to do a presentation and talk about it to them is not only something that's easy for them, but also enjoyable. And it's a great way for us to get the information from them.
A very practical question on that, Claire. Do you use any AI tools once you have that transcript? Have you experimented with that yet?
I have. So I love AI. I use it for everything, even in my
You're not
personal
really
life.
here right now, are you? This isn't even
No,
you.
I'm
No.
not. That actually, they do act, there's an AI tool where you can have
Hmm.
it tend for you in meetings. Uh, on the other side, our learners do not like AI videos and voices. So we're still working on that. I think AI has a long way to go before
Yeah.
it's really realistic.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't mean presenting to the
but on the
learner.
backside, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So you are
Yeah.
using the tools and
Mm.
it can summarize and bring things together quickly.
Yes, and it actually does a nice job of writing learning objectives and
Oh,
test
yeah.
questions in a line.
See, we don't need Lana anymore. She's
Yeah.
no longer queen of learning objectives.
No.
Well, now I
We
don't need
do.
all these Bloom's taxonomy verbs taped to my wall. I just
Yep.
go to an AI tool and ask it. And actually, we a great way to learn is case studies.
Mm,
So rather than, listen to this 60-second or 60-minute presentation, learn about, Joe, and Joe went to the doctor and here's his chart and things like that. But those are time consuming to write, and so
yeah.
we use AI tools to write cases, and then we have a clinician review it to
Yeah.
fact check
Mhm.
everything. But it has saved us a lot of time and money because we're not paying and then waiting several weeks for someone to write case studies for our learners.
We kind of, and these numbers I'm sure will change as things develop, but we kind of use the idea of 60% AI will get you 60% of the way there. The rest, the other 40 is up to you and up to the human element, but it does cut an enormous amount of time. Um, let's see, what tools can assist in writing case studies? Claire, you want to share what tool? I mean, is it Chat GPT or do you
Oh,
use some?
you can. We actually pay, it's very inexpensive though, for a nursing school in Minnesota developed a
Hmm.
AI case-based tool, and when you log in, you give it all the specifics that you want, and you check all the boxes. It's kind of like
Oh,
a
wow.
rubric where you just say, I want these things included, and then it creates the case, and then
Mhm.
obviously you can edit it as needed.
Right.
But I actually think, I mean, it's better. We're getting a lot more diversity in our cases than when we were having our SMEs write them, because SMEs were writing cases based on their experiences, but
Mm,
you know,
Mhm.
that can be very limited.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Thank you. Miriam, you want to jump into any extracting information? Any
No,
other?
actually, I would like to bounce it over to Lana. So some of these bullets came from her, well, all of them really. So Lana has numerous times put together just really, really large lists of ways to get information. And that's something that I think like a lot of times we just don't think outside the box on. And so Lana, I don't know if you want to expand on any of these, but I know you are so flexible in doing what's best for the SME.
Yeah, I love that Claire said, well, it really depends on the SME. And I was inside going, yes, because there's not just a one way fits all.
Mhm.
You do have to know what's best for the person that you're working with. One of the things that I don't see on here is sometimes the subject matter expert is actually a team of people.
Mhm.
And so to have, a web a video chat with a whole team of people, and just allowing kind of like an open mic situation where everyone's chiming in and recording that. You can get a lot of good information that way.
Yeah,
Um,
Karima mentioned that earlier too, Lana. Just I'm looking at there it is on brainstorming sessions, could be in person or virtual.
yeah. So sometimes it's good to get that herd, mentality of what everybody knows, not just one person. Some people do like what Claire said, but more of just a stream of consciousness where just put them on a recorder and just have them talk. Sometimes we give them an outline and then they can fill it in. Yeah, there's just a lot of different ways depending on what your SME is comfortable with and what fits them best.
So Lana, I'm just going to have you, so in interest of time, just move on to managing time and deadlines because there's one more that we want to get to here. So we can see what we have on the screen. Anything in addition to, communication, regular check-ins that you want to highlight?
Yeah, I just think this is one way that we can really help lower the stress, and setting up those meetings just to check in, maybe using something like a smart sheet that will build out all of the timelines for the project so that they can see if you take an extra week reviewing the alpha storyboard, what does that do to push out our, deadline for the project. So just making it very clear, like Claire said, a lot of communication, and so that everyone knows what to expect, and it takes the struggle away from them, makes it very clear.
Yeah. Just Kathy, real quick, excellent point in getting all the SMEs together, multiple SMEs. The need to identify leads me, because we call it the single source of truth, because otherwise you're not a SME and you're asked to somehow pull this all together. We've had that multiple times, and you end up with some sort of weird platypus because things look in conflict. Let's talk a little bit about overcoming the collaborative obstacles. And Claire, we'll come back to you. Just share some thoughts here, and Lana and Miriam, jump in where you like.
I think to overcome collaboration obstacles, which are listed here, whether they're disconnected or lack of expertise, comes down to sharing examples. So quite often I'll have usually they're disconnected from learners just because it's been so long since they've developed something, versus lack of expertise is usually someone who's earlier in their career. But either way, I'll show them what other modules that we've created and what the feedback has been on that. I I tell SMEs not that they have time for this, but to create the best online course or module that you can, you have to start by being an online student. So take one of our courses. So we actually developed a very short, like a micro learning module that's about 10, maybe 5 to 10 minutes. And it's really built in Articulate Rise, introducing SMEs to our process. So it's not really content heavy with what they're going to be writing, but it gives them the experience of being an online learner. And that helps a lot with the disconnection, because I have found that a lot of times it's just that the SME can't picture something, or they can't imagine what the final product is going to look like or how it works. And you can explain something to someone over and over, but until they see it,
Yeah.
it's not really going to make sense. So I think you can mitigate a lot of these issues by just having them experience a very short module. And actually, Articulate has online modules for free. You can download like storylines and things like that to use. So you could even just find one. I actually found one about weather and sent it to a SME and said, this is really what we're looking for. Obviously, it's going to be about diabetes, but then they could see how everything worked and what the learner experience would be like.
That's cool. Janet, really good comment. One of the ways to overcome, the messiness of multiples or whatever is at the kickoff, she says, I asked the primary SME to sort out the other SMEs into secondary SMEs, stakeholders, learning reps, and so on. And then, right, kind of serve as that filter. I like that a lot. Miriam and Lana, other things to add to this? To
Yes.
overcoming some of the obstacles?
Especially with Maya, if she's missed a few meetings, sometimes it's really hard for SMEs to have, a half an hour here, half an hour there. If that starts to build up, it might just be better to say, hey, do you have 2 hours that, like one time, let's sit down, knock this out, get it all done. Let's just have some dedicated time together to finish. And sometimes that's what it takes, rather than all these little meetings spread apart.
Yeah. And Jenny, just following up on your comment here, creating an e-learning module for a former employee that was kind of pointed at a dual purpose of introducing SMEs to the process, because we're a little bit back to onboarding, but a lot of times SMEs have no idea what the actual process is, and that's a good one. But then also giving them an example. This is what this is what a good course looks like. Miriam, anything to add there?
No, I would just say I echo Lana's. Sometimes it is easier for some really busy people to, and we also know the way that the brain works, right? Like to constantly be distracted, you just can't get in a good flow. So to ask them instead to, if you're finding that you're not getting good response and you've sent clear timelines, I mean, this is the spot where we do have to function as project managers, and if we can't provide clear timelines to them, then that's really on us. But if we're not getting responses from a SME, then sometimes it's just much easier to say, hey, can you just set aside 2 hours and let's just go through this? And it feels better to them too, instead of hanging out there for weeks and weeks and weeks.
Right, right. Stephanie, excellent comment too. We have a SME of record for a topic.
Mhm.
That's a really good idea, and to track those. Well, if you do all these things, let's look back at our SMEs at the beginning.
Yeah.
Eric, the expert, and Maya, the MIA, and then Carlo, the confused. The idea is through the magic of AI to turn them into Eric, the empathetic expert. So he can put himself in the shoes of others. Maya in the moment, she's there when you need her, and then Carlo, the contributor, instead of the confused. So
Mhm.
um, we want to highlight one thing. We have another webinar coming up. It is January 14th. It's why you're learning stakeholders matter and how to keep them engaged. We've all had stakeholder challenges. It's already been mentioned, stakeholders who think they're SMEs. Sometimes SMEs think they're stakeholders. Learning to identify who your stakeholders are, and then really how to build that relationship and have them work with you and have them understand what your process is and what value you bring. And so if there's a little QR code there, and we'll send you some invites for that too. If there are no other questions, and I don't believe I see any, I think we simply want to say thank you to all of
Mhm.
you for joining us. We appreciate the gift of your time, and certainly for all the comments. It makes it so much more fun to have a conversation this way. So to all of you, we wish you an excellent morning or afternoon or evening, depending on where you are in the world. And we look forward to our next conversation and to our panelists. Um, Claire, thank you so much
Mhm.
for joining us from the ADA, and Miriam from Ingenuity, and Lana from Ingenuity. We really, really appreciate all of you sharing your expertise and your wisdom.
Thank you.
And with that, we wish you well, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you very much.